So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Filmmakers Forum. Filmmakers Forum is organized by the School of Media and Communication through its Nollywood Studies Centre. It is a forum intended to facilitate interaction amongst the practitioners and between the practitioners and the general audience. So we will take questions as we go along, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll take them from there. Great, I see you now, Busola. Welcome.
Thank you.
So it is our great pleasure to have with us Dr. Busola Tejumola, who is a content strategist with over 20 years of experience in media and information technology. She specializes in customer and media relations, IT systems, consumer insights, and content strategy. She joined MultiChoice as Consumer Insight Manager in 2012 and became Head of Strategy and Insights in 2014. In 2017, she was appointed General Manager, Productions, where she led the team that launched Big Brother Naija, Africa Magic Viewers' Choice Awards, and original productions such as Battleground, Jimeji, and Ajoche. She's currently the Executive Head of Content and Channels, West Africa at MultiChoice, where she oversees the programming and content strategy for 6 Africa Magic channels in Nigeria and 2 Akwaba Magic channels in Ghana, available on DSTV and Go TV. She also manages content distribution across MultiChoice's linear channels, video on demand platforms, DSTV Stream, GeoTV Stream, and Showmax, and mobile devices. Dr. Tejumola has played a key role in shaping content direction in West Africa, driving audience engagement, subscription growth, and advertising revenue. She has led major projects, including multiple editions of Big Brother Naija, and has positioned the Africa Magic brand to align with evolving content consumption trends. She holds a PhD in Management Information Systems and Computing. In 2023, she was elected as a member of the International Television Arts and Sciences and was recognized by Forbes Africa as one of the top in technology leadership and organizational management. Beyond her work in television, Dr. Tejumola advises startups and mentors young professionals with a focus on the creative and tech industries. I would say, Busola, you have been busy. You have been very busy indeed. That is one way of putting it. So once again, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Let's get the ball rolling. With a PhD in Management Information Systems and Computing, you could very well be called a techie, as they say. So how have you ended up working in the film industry? Just to establish the platform.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Obiaya, for having me. I'm really thrilled to be having the discussion with you today. And thanks to everyone who has also joined online to listen. I will start by saying that in hindsight, it is a very connected world. And, gone are the days where you'd study the one thing and that is what you had to practice.
Right.
I'm sure if we took a poll just in the virtual room and asked people what they wanted to study, what they ended up studying, and what they are practicing now. I'm sure our results will be quite, interesting. So yes, I did start up as a techie, if you put it that way. It's now that they call it tech. Then it was IT. Right. Yes, I did. I studied computer science at the University of Ibadan. I was a hardware girl. So I was the girl networking and the girl under the tables and, coupling computers. Again, we used to couple CPUs then. Now it's laptops and nothing. But, the CPUs used to be under the table. And so I was that girl. I was not as much into software. It was more hardware and networking. I then got my first job at MWeb. MWeb was, at the time, the internet service provider for MultiChoice, a different company, but for MultiChoice. And I moved, so it was internet service provision. Technology had somewhat evolved then, and we used to use VSATs. I don't know if anyone remembered VSATs.
Yeah, it's VSAT.
DSTV,
Yes.
yeah. So DSTV and internet at the time. At internet at the time, you had to have a dish, a big dish, on your roof. And so I was very into, hardware, into installing dishes. I would climb roofs. I was that girl. And I then moved into business development. So I'm very curious by nature, and I always try to figure out how things work and why they don't work. And at that point was when I somewhat segued within the same business into business development. But in the course of that happening, the company got sold to Iway Africa, and that's why I became, a staff of Iway Africa. Iway Africa was then fully into internet service provision. From there, at some point, I had started my PhD in 2009. In 2009, my PhD was, my master's actually was in management information systems. But my PhD topic actually came from a personal experience that I had. And it was really about change management and user adoption. Can you still hear me? Because I see that your face.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And my PhD did come from a personal problem or personal experience that I had. So I focused my PhD on user adoption of IT systems and change management, the impact of change management on user adoption of information technology systems. But somewhere along the PhD, I realized that actually user adoption and change management don't only obviously affect IT, it affects everything in every single organization. And so in my research, I researched two companies across 6 industries: IT, oil and gas, and another service industry, because I then wanted to prove if this was only for IT services or if it cut across different industries. And yes, it did. And I think that was where my journey into management started. So from Iway, I then moved to MultiChoice, which is a completely different industry. I got into MultiChoice as the consumer insights manager. My job was to scout the landscape, quantitative insight, generally just get data and mine the insight for the company. But in the course of research, you'd find gaps, you'd find emerging themes, you'd find solutions, problems. I then moved as a head of strategy for MultiChoice Nigeria. As the head of strategy, my job then, was expanded into driving the strategy for the company. What project, how we fit into the industry and into the market, and what we're doing with the insight to the market from the markets. I had a quick stint as the head of production at Africa Magic in 2017, where I managed the productions for Africa Magic for the 2.5 years before I became the head of content for MultiChoice. And then the Africa Magic portfolio just got added about 3 years ago.
Okay.
That is my journey at MultiChoice. So yes, it's been from IT, but somehow with data, with problem solving, identifying gaps, I've somehow moved into content. Not only as a creative, but if you look at the journey and how I've kind of chronicled data and chronicled business and strategy, my role now really sits at looking at how we maximize the opportunities we have in the industry, not only from a creative point of view.
Actually, I would say that with what you studied, you were one step ahead of the rest of us, because in today's world where we are talking about platformization, and in which through that process we are actually growing creative content, it's really where everybody is operating today. So in a way, you were really very much one step ahead of everybody in getting this background, because it's so essential. I don't think you can separate the whole realm of creativity and IT in today's world. You can't. The two of them go very much together. So yes, I can see how very useful it is for you in what you're doing right now. Now, by the way, I feel at the beginning to say Happy International Women's Day. Today is International Women's Day. So to you and to all the other ladies on the call, Happy International Women's Day. We'll come back to this in a moment because it's now in a media interview of yours, you announced that your focus is on acquiring, commissioning, and producing the very best local content in line with our hyper-local content strategy. That is rather deep. Can you give us some insight on the process that you have for achieving this?
Okay. So as MultiChoice, and part of what we do is, one, we acquire content that is already produced titles from independent producers. We license those, but we also commission content to producers. So these are titles that we pay for, we finance. They are our originals for the platform. And we sometimes do co-productions, and that's where we co-finance with other independent producers. Our hyperlocal strategy, we found very critical many years ago, actually, because we sometimes look at Nigeria as national. And from content, it is national, but from a content perspective, you cannot view the country as one. Otherwise, you then find that your target audience is somewhat underserved. So we then went ahead and, as a business, broke the country into different parts, into segments. And that is how we approach our content acquisition. So sometimes I'll find someone say, oh, but that channel you guys have on DSTV, nobody watches it. Like, who's it for? And I'm like, you're not the target audience. The target audience is sitting in Kano, or the target audience is sitting in Ibadan. And as long as we can measure the impact of that title or the channel or the content in that region, then it has served its purpose. And so that's why we would have many channels on the platform. Some of them target the country as a whole. They're English speaking, they're international. I mean, you know, the ones that really service the nation, but there's some niche content that we have which speaks to our hyperlocal, right? That would then service certain parts of the nation or certain segments of our target audience. This also goes for even our English. If you watch any of our primetime shows on Africa Magic, yes, we might be speaking English, but you'd find that most of our telenovelas revolve around different communities. So we have Africa Magic Showcase, which is English speaking, purely 100% English and some pidgin. We have Africa Magic Family, and then we have our 3 indigenous channels for Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. I'd get questions where someone from, I mean, maybe Ishekiri or Calabar or, you know, Doma would say, this is my language and you don't have a channel for me. We cannot carry channels for all the languages. But what we then do is we make sure that there is representation in every piece of content that we produce. So if you'd watch titles like Riona or Ajoche or Omera, it's either Igbo, it's either Idoma, it's either Ishekiri, you know, so we'd make sure that we get that cultural representation across our different titles. And that really speaks to us making sure that our content is hyperlocal.
It makes a lot of sense now that you've explained it in terms of having 7 channels for African Magic and 2 for Ghana. But then the question, you are overseeing West Africa as a whole and looking at those channels, what's the word now? The majority of those channels are Nigerian. That's understandable given the numbers. But then I see that only Ghana has its own channels there. Is there a plan for the future for the other West African countries, or is the challenge the fact that they are not English speaking? Is there, I don't know, what will it be like for if you're trying to reach now beyond Nigeria? So it's not just national, as you put it, but then there's also the international scope.
So even if you look at Ghana, Ghana is not really English speaking as well. Right. So if you check the
Sure.
Aquaba Magic, I mean, they speak English, yes, but if you check Aquaba Magic, most of the content is either in Twi or in, in the
Okay.
in Ga or in other languages. So yes, there
Right.
will be at some point in the future plans to move into those regions. But we have to also then find a way to one first operate as businesses in those particular communities, in those regions.
Okay.
So it will be a bigger strategy to then see what the next country or the next region would be, either French speaking. But what they would do though is for some of the French speaking regions, we partner with Canal Plus.
Okay.
And so they carry a lot of our content. There's a channel, there's French speaking channel on the platform that at least already services those communities in the short term. And so some of the content is dubbed, some of the content on there are French. We just make sure that at least to some extent we are also still servicing those regions.
So it means then that really those filmmakers that come to you are really assured of a very, you could say, extensive platform
Yeah.
in terms of how far their content will go across
Yes.
all of these countries. Now, you spoke about niche communities, although you were referring more now to the cultural aspect, but there are also these niche genres that you could say we don't see much of. What is your position on things like, I suppose numbers matter a lot in this, but then when people complain that, okay, I don't see content I would like to see, such as Afrofuturism, science fiction, horror, for instance, is there any policy around that in terms
No,
of targeting or creating things for smaller groups like that?
no, and they're not even smaller groups. And I wouldn't also say that they're very niche. I think horror and Afrofuturism, they've come to stay. They are mainstream. There are many international horror movies that perform well. And you can have a cross between your thrillers and horror. Some thrillers sometimes kind of blur the lines and become
Yeah, true,
horror genres.
true.
Um, it's still a function of the capabilities in the industry. So there is no policy around it. It's just still largely depends on the capabilities within the industry to produce those kind of movies or those kind of genres and to produce them well. We've traditionally, as a culture, as a country, grown with your dramas, your,
Mhm,
romance, your
mhm.
dramas, your melodrama, all of those we've traditionally grown with. That's what Nollywood was really based on.
Right.
And as an industry, I think that there is a hesitation to move away from that because again, that's what people watch the most. But that's also because that's what they're used to and that's what they're fed. Right. So you'd see a producer, independent producer who has a budget and is thinking, should I do horror or should I just go and do my drama? And most times, 8 out of 10 times, they pick the drama because they need their
Yeah.
returns. And you said you did say it rightly. Numbers do make a big difference. They pick the drama because they are sure they've seen it, it's been tested, they're sure that they will get their returns. Not many producers will take the risk and produce. There are some that have been produced, but they're not enough. We need more
Okay.
and we need consistency in those genres for them to
Okay.
then become mainstay in the industry. We will make mistakes at first. They might not be great at first because we're trying to, get it right. But I think that with
Mhm.
more focus on them, it can become something that would be widespread. As Africa Magic or as MultiChoice, the data does really make a big difference. So we commission research. We have many data points, as to how we understand the psyche of our audience, how we understand their viewing patterns, the platforms they watch on, the new and emerging themes. And
Okay.
those genres at the moment are not top. Should we start and be should we start there and just start seeing if we can do a bit more there. Absolutely. If any of you have watched Dead of Night, it's on Showmax at the moment. It's a movie. It wasn't horror, but it was quite horror. But it wasn't the kind of horror movie that you'd see, on the international. I think capability-wise, we need to also get there. But we are sort of starting to move in that direction for some of our titles. Just to make sure that one, we're growing the capability and the interest from the producers in those genres.
Now, I like what you said a moment ago about data. It tends to be a constant complaint in this country of ours that there is a lack of data, and this creates an obstacle really in terms of deciding what to do or what not to do. How do you go about collecting data to obtain your insights about your consumer? You said some things now, but if you could expand a little bit on that, really. And what is the possibility that in the future we will have, you could say, shared data? Because in other countries you have that, where they say that you get regular updates about viewership and so on and so forth. So how do you does it mean you have your own interior or internal rather research group that is constantly working?
So firstly, I think every company does. Every company has their own research and development for their product and for their company. But I'll start by also saying that we have to get up to a point as a country, and this cuts across all the industries, where there is a repository of data that everyone can use and everyone can access. This would not necessarily be done by private companies. It will be done more by your research companies, where they would then have and there used to be, there used to be some, where you then have your consumer data, you have your finance data, whatever it is, but there would be a repository that people can put their data in, and then anyone who needs to mine that data can. What you find at the moment is everyone is gatekeeping their data. And rightfully so, because they paid for the research, they have many data points, and really, whatever questions they're asking, or whatever research is being commissioned, is tailored towards a specific product, right, or a specific project that is being run. But back to us, yes, we have a very huge research and development unit. We commission a lot of research on everything. We actually don't make any decisions without data. Of course, there's creativity, there's intuition and experience that goes with it, but data really is what is our powerful tool. And so, yes, we have data that we commission. We commission research the traditional way. We have our tech-driven data. We have panels. We have our call centers. So we think that data can only be gotten once we go out and commission research. Every data point is very important. We have hundreds of call center agents. I'm sure many people here receive calls from them once a month. The outbound, the inbound, for every kind of interaction we have with the customer is actually a data point for us. If a customer calls in now and says, guys, why I renewed my subscription and it hasn't come through, we've taken that as some feedback. When you have a pool of complaints that way, you then want to look into it and do some research as to what is happening. Is it a knowledge problem? Is it really a technology problem? Do we need to do more content discovery? Do we need to educate the customers more? That is what then formed that data input for that segment. So yes, we know what people are watching largely. We commission research just to even hear from people as to what they think, content discovery, how the genres, the channels, how they pay, that customer satisfaction is a huge part of what we do at MultiChoice. When our call center agents call, they also ask questions, right, around content, around data. So I wouldn't say we have one point of entry. I think we have many data sources that we then collate and mine to make our informed decisions.
Let me base myself on that platform that you have to ask this question. There is this general conception that comedy is what sells. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. I can.
Okay. So that comedy is what sells. This is what people tend to believe. Based on the data you have, is this really the case that people will always go for comedy above every other genre?
So I'll always then ask the question back that who are people and what segment, what is the, how many people are saying that comedy is what sells? Because sometimes you know that there's a halo effect on things. You find a few people who have a loud voice say something and then it becomes the truth. But that's not really the general consensus. It's just a few people who are loud and visible that have said it. And if we are not careful, especially in the days with social media and how things can quickly be believed, you didn't find out there's a rabbit hole. I mean, we keep going around in circles because once there is this perception, everyone goes in that direction without really
Exactly.
researching or actually checking if the hypothesis is really true, if you get what I mean. So no, comedy isn't the only thing that sells. At least that's not what data is saying.
Yes.
There are many genres do well, and we've seen that on our platforms, especially on TV, right? Many genres do well. Comedy does well. Does comedy do well? Absolutely. Comedy does well. We were sad to end the Johnsons after 12 years. Flatmates is still on, it's still going strong. So do people like any kind of comedy? Situational, daily? Yes, they do. But do they like other genres? Absolutely. They love your dramas, they love your horrors, they love your thrillers, your romance movies. All these things are also really doing well according to data. And not just, so comedy doesn't stand out as the only genre that does well. But I mean, I think the bottom line, no matter what genre it is, people want relatable stories. They want a story they can resonate with.
Yes. Yes.
So you can have the most expensive, you can produce the most expensive comedy that has 1000% production values. And you think, oh my gosh, it looks beautiful. It has all your best actors and actresses in it. The story isn't strong. You'd hear people after watching it say, "Can I have 2 hours of my life back? Why did I watch why did I watch this?" Uh, Meanwhile, if you had a movie that didn't look great, you'd know that okay, the budget wasn't great. But from the first scene, the story grips them. They will watch it to the end.
Yes.
And no one is going to talk about how it looked. They will watch it to the end. So we still need to take care of our stories. And sometimes we sound like broken records when we are talking about authentic storytelling. I'm sure everyone is like, if I hear authentic one more time. But we've heard when we talk about authentic storytelling and we are talking about stories that are relatable, stories that resonate, we are mostly paying lip service to it. A lot of people are paying lip service to it because you then watch the show and you're like, no, you could have taken some more time with the story.
Yes.
Nigerians are watching shows that are not even in English. They're just subtitled. And they'll watch 5 seasons of that title. It's not their culture. It's not Nigerian. They're not speaking a language you understand. It's subtitled, but the story resonates. That is it's not really the genre. I think it's the storytelling that makes it sell.
I'm very happy to hear you say that because it's always been my view that we don't have any data to support this, and people keep repeating that. But let me take you up on something you just said, the storytelling. I have also heard that complaint that people say, compared to when the industry first started, much of what we are seeing today is substandard in terms of storytelling, stories that really grip you, authentic stories. So people, that complaint, I've heard quite a bit of it. But what do you think could be a problem in terms of, because in terms of story development and so on? And I think that with television, story development, a lot more takes place than you find sometimes with some of the films that go to the cinema. So from your perspective, what would you say we need to put in place in terms of dealing with this thing of really telling authentic stories? Even though, yes, people say it a lot, but it's true. We have to hear more of it. People want authenticity. So from your perspective, what would you say has to be done? What needs to be put in place in order for us to at least try and grow the quality of our stories?
Yeah. I find that we are treating the symptoms at the moment and not necessarily going to the root cause of the issues. Capacity building is such a big deal. We're partners, we do the MultiChoice talent factory. We need a lot more in terms of capacity building. The people who wrote those stories that we really enjoyed then are probably not even telling stories as much as they used to. Some of them have left the industry. Some of them are just aged, and and I'm saying chronologically, I mean, they're aged in terms of they've grown, and they've passed the baton to the younger generation, right? But in passing the baton to the younger generation, where the younger generation really trained in that way that they were trained, in the way that they used to tell stories. Because the way technology has evolved and everything now needs to look shiny and nice, we are spending a lot of money on productions, but not a lot on the story. So it's become just like social media, just like everything needs to be quick, instant gratification. Let's churn this thing out. As long as it looks nice, I put beautiful faces there, faces they know, it can go to cinema. But you will then look at the story and ask if you actually spent a bit more time. So one, it might be the time that is spent in development that is the problem. Because there is a demand and a pressure to churn out movies for different seasons. So Christmas season is always a hot time. Summer is always a hot time. There is a demand and a pressure to churn out movies at different seasons. I'm imagining that before the filmmakers organize themselves, it's close to time they want to release, and so they just churn these things out. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone, so I'm not making a general statement, right? There still are producers and filmmakers who take their time, sit down and look at the story and really develop the story that resonates. But for those that really would just churn things out, I think one, we need to spend more time in storytelling. Two, we need to understand that we are not the target audience. We need to get to a point where the story is the first thing. We don't move until our story is solid. And I was saying that we also need to sometimes understand that we are not the target audience. So I'm sitting in...
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, now I can hear you. I'm sitting in development. I might not necessarily agree with the storyline, but if the consensus in the room, and I've asked questions, we've done everything, like we've antagonized our own stories, and we've come to a resolution within that story. Even if I don't love the story or the storyline, as long as the representation in the room think that is a strong story, and logically to me as well, it looks like a strong story, we'll go with it. So I am not the target audience. Producers need to understand that most times they are also not the target audience. They might have a vision, but they need to marry that vision with what the viewers really find important. So what a producer finds important in certain stories might not necessarily be what the audience find important. So it's a fine art. There needs to be that balance with what you as the visionary of the project want, and if your story is truly relatable. I think once we are able to, one, train more writers, we need more writers. I know that we are struggling with writers at the moment at African Magic for some of our shows, because yes, we have a crop of great writers, amazing writers, but then you also need a bigger pool that you can take for different projects. I'm imagining that many producers are also facing, this same concern. It's not that there are no writers. I think they just need some sort of formal training sometimes, and even structuring the story. You watch some movies that your viewer can term all over the place. It was a strong story. So it could have been the editing or just the way the story was structured. So one, if we can, it's a shared problem, and I think it will be a shared solution if we can find more storytelling training for writers. It would go a long way in the end product. And then two, if the producers don't always get in the way of the story. I've seen many projects where I'm asking, how did this story leave the writer's room? And certain writers would say, well, we tried to tell the producer that this story, but that's what the producer wanted. And at the end of the day, your EP is your EP. So the producers sometimes also need to get out of the way and trust that their writers are giving them a good story. Three, we also need to understand that it's not about us. We are not the target audience.
Yeah.
Do your research when you have a story. And I know, of course, everyone can commission research just for a movie, but there are many data points. There are many things online that you can check. Just do a bit of research on your story and make sure your story is believable, right, before we put it out.
Yeah, I think what you said is key, that I identify really who is the target audience, because many times we're doing things that we like, not so much what the audience does enjoy. But now let's talk about children. Let's talk about children. There is, relatively speaking, a dearth of locally produced children's content. And just thinking about this, I thought that really we should be very concerned, looking at the future growth of the industry, to produce content for children now, because in producing content for children, those children are going to be exposed to locally told stories. They are going to grow a thirst for when they are now adults for that content, for our local content. Whereas now, what they have access to a large extent, is Cartoon Network and such things. Of course, yes, the taste will then be different. But what is happening in this regard? I would have thought that children's content, in terms of revenue, is actually a very important segment. Is this part of your strategy in terms of actually targeting this audience or getting people to focus on this audience?
Yes, it is. I think that's the simple answer. Yes, it is. But what you would also find is we rely heavily on producers, right? Even if we are commissioning or licensing the industry, when we say that we build the ecosystem and we are major players in making the ecosystem work, it really is true. We rely heavily on the producers. And if you don't have many producers who want to focus on kids' content, then I think that's where we need to start from. Are there producers trying to do it? Absolutely. In fact, I had a meeting with a fantastic company 2 days ago. They're doing amazing work with children's content. We had a producers forum, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and they were present for the AMVCs. And I remember this gentleman asking me then this same question you asked me. And I asked him, where are the producers for children's content? And he says, okay. So I did tell him, we're a network. If we get pitches for children's content, it's easier for us to then go and commission if we know that there is a pipeline for it. And at that point, he came back. He did come back. He came back a year or so after, because they had been playing in that space, but not mainstream. And I know that they had been trying to just do what they could. We did partner on a project, my siblings game show. That was the first thing that we did. And they came back a few days ago just to say, what else can we do? What more? So we do have plans for children's content. But what I would also say is that we also need more producers focusing on children's content. There is a lot. It's a bit difficult to produce for kids, and the producers who already are in that space will tell you the same. You can't market directly at kids. So if you're then looking at the revenue that would come with it, commercializing it, you then have sponsors so they go to sponsors, they don't directly market at kids. There's a lot that goes around producing kids content that somehow I know can be a barrier for producers, but we do need to start. If you watch our African Magic Family channel, we lend the platform for producers who are in that space and who want their work to be seen. as a staple for kids content. Again, as a channel, we need consistency. Anything that will do well, one, needs to start. Two, needs to be consistent. What we haven't found is the consistency in that space. There is a lot of animation. Don't get me wrong. It's a segment that we are watching very closely. And it's a segment that we will start playing in sooner than later. But as at a year, 2 years ago, there was a lot of questions around. There were a lot of questions around, but animation, there are local animations. There are local animations, but we all know how expensive local animations are. And we all know how time-consuming they also are. So that pipeline, like I said, is very important. We plan long-term. We will not, with a knee-jerk reaction, say, oh, bring it on now. And then 1 year down the line, we have to close down the channel. We need a pipeline that is sustainable. Will it take time? Yes, it is taking some time, but I believe that when we get to that point, there will be no going back. That door would already be open, and we as MultiChoice will always be ready to, one, create the platform, provide the platform for the distribution, two, commission in some areas where we can. Right. So at the moment, we're testing game shows for kids, for families, but we need scripted content where kids can just watch. If anyone watched My Siblings and I, that ran for 5 years. It was for the children, and it performed really well. So it's family with eight siblings, and really that's what it was, siblings and I. So it was all the chaos that happened there. So it's us now testing the kind of kids content that will work in the market. That's what we're doing now. Which one works, which one doesn't work, and what really should we be concentrating our efforts on?
Great. No, really, I think my friend Omotunde is on this call, and she was telling me about how thrilled her daughter was to turn on the television one day and see a locally produced show. And she was so excited because she says she was seeing people that were like her. So certainly what you say is there certainly is room for that kind of interest. Now, there's a question here from David who says, will Siblings Game Show get a reboot?
It potentially can, and I would say potentially because it's still one season, right, that we've done. So yes, it potentially will get. I met with the producers recently. It potentially can get a reboot. It's just we need to look at what the first season did in terms of the impact and see if really do we even want to be going with game shows. Again, when someone says it was beautiful and everyone watched it, I keep asking, who is everyone that watched it?
Right.
We need to be able to quantify our statements and quantify realistically what success means, right? So success can mean something to a niche, but then if you're looking more, holistically, you're looking at the channel or the platform, was it really successful? Now, does that mean we should cancel? No, it just means how do we then make it better for bigger impact?
Yes. Okay, I have another question from Oluwatomilola, who says, what's the challenge with seeing a similar situation to what goes on in South Africa, where DSTV subscribers can subscribe to Disney Plus? There seems to be a growing audience for it. And he also asks another question there. Why don't we have a late night comedy news circuit here? For instance, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, etc.
Thank you, Oluwatomilola. Your feedback has been taken. We are watching the DSTV Disney Plus partnership in South Africa. Again, because we're privy to a lot of the data, we will not rush into certain decisions. So you might want to watch Disney Plus. We need to then figure out how many more people really want to watch Disney Plus. How many people are watching it now in South Africa as a base case? Is it doing well? Is it a partnership that is working? Right. So because it is an expensive venture, right? So those discussions those decisions need to be based again on data of the base case. But is this something that we are monitoring? Absolutely. Jimmy, your late night comedy news circuits, If you have a pitch, please bring it. But don't
In
forget,
terms-
those are also niche, but please bring the page. If you have a page, I'm going to drop our submissions portal in the chat before we end the conversation. If you have any storytellers in the meeting, or any producers in the meeting, please feel free to send your pitches there.
Okay, there's already a question in that regard. Omotunde is asking, is it possible to send in pitches for children's shows at development level, or must the producer be attached to the project?
The producer doesn't necessarily have to be attached to the project. Would like the producer to be attached to the project, because they are the visionaries for the project, right? But sometimes we also just buy stories and we find a producer who would run with it.
Okay, I have a rather long question or a series of questions from Dave. You have it, it's in the Q&A. This one.
Yes, I'm just reading it now. So it
Okay,
says, I think a large
fantastic.
portion of testing children's content is influenced by the Western media that our children have already consumed. Are we producing in comparison to responses from them and content that have already shaped them? Or are we overlooking profits and taking the risk of making content to shape the child audience? We're talking about agenda in Nigerian media. So you've asked two questions, basically in one. Is it a direct response to what they're watching? I don't think so. From what I've seen, from the shows I've seen, from the shows we've commissioned, from the pitches some of the pitches I've seen, it's not a direct response to what the children are watching. I think more producers are interested in shaping, in making sure that our children know our culture, our history, and you'd find that these shows are not coming with accents, or they're not trying to mimic, the international shows that you're seeing. They are basically really trying to just address your child's psyche at the moment. So what are the kids watching? The only thing that I would say here is, you see your kids under 10, you can still address them with your cartoon-like, your animation-like, those kind of stories. It will really work for them. But you see your kids between your 11, and at this point, they're no longer kids, between your 11 and 15, 16, it's a completely different ballgame, right? Because there has been such a dearth in content produced for them for so long. In fact, I dare say nothing has really been produced for them for so long. We forced them to be adult content-wise very quickly. So they've moved from shows like the international shows like your Game Shakers, your iCarly, and they've moved directly to watching, adult movies and adult content because there just wasn't content for them, right? So if we're going to do this, we need to be doing it with a purpose. Otherwise, what we are then doing is really, like you said, just mimicking what they are watching on TV. We need to be doing it with a bit more purpose, but we need to meet them where they are. Kids like to see themselves on TV. How do we make that engaging? How do we reflect what their everyday lives are on TV for them, as opposed to just building a world that responds directly to what they're seeing on TV? Because if you look at those shows, the international shows, they really are just addressing where the kids are at the moment, right? So talking about agenda, I don't know that it's a very sensitive industry. It's a very sensitive segment of the industry. And many people will play it different ways, but I think that the common goal would be one to entertain the Nigerian or the African child in a way that is wholesome, in a way that is futuristic for them, and in a way that just exposes them to, the world.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Stephen, who's asking, you mentioned capacity building as a key factor in quality production, script to screen. Do you have or plan to have exchange programs with tertiary institutions offering film/TV related programs?
Dr. Ogaya, should I
So,
leave you to answer that question?
if you permit me.
Yes.
Well, at least in one of them, there is this MultiChoice Talent Factory, which, yes, the School of Media and Communication is the educational partner of MultiChoice to run this program. And over the last 3 or 4 years now, they have produced each year 20 people who have gone through this program and really who have gone through very intensive training in terms of not just script writing now, but the different phases of production. And I think that they have produced some wonderful, the alumni of this program have produced some truly wonderful work in terms of content, which, yes, has also been shown on MultiChoice channels. Not just MultiChoice now, they've gone even beyond, and they're doing great work. So that is one concrete thing that MultiChoice has already put in place in response to that question.
And the MultiChoice Talent Factory, sorry, Dr. Obiaya, the MultiChoice Talent Factory also has master classes. So we know that every year it's only 20 students that can get into the Talent Factory because it's a fully 1-year immersive program that is very intensive. But we understand that there is a wider need and we need to be able to impact a wider audience. So we have series of master classes that we run all year round in partnership with either the New York Film Academy. There are many academic organizations that we partner with all year round for masterclasses in different aspects of filmmaking. So if you just follow any of the MultiChoice Talent Factory handles, or even I think on the DSTV handles, once there's a masterclass, it's put up there. They're free. You can join the masterclasses. You can join as many as you want. They're free, but I think they're really, really helpful. You would find something for everyone sometime during the year.
Great. Raphael is asking, why does DSTV not show latest movies, at least movies within 2 to 5 years old?
Raphael, what are you watching? Which DSTV are you watching? I'm going to put people on blast here. So when certain questions I ask, you notice that I usually answer questions sometimes with questions. And I do that because I'm trying to put up a mirror and reflect your question back to you. If I take a poll of how many people actually have a DSTV subscription, and like are actually watching, they might have a subscription, but are actually watching the channel, not many. Right? So some questions come from their past knowledge of a product and not the current knowledge of the product or current experience. Some come from a current experience, but then I'll ask, what package are you on? I mean, there are many questions I can ask because the Mnet channel, the Mnet 101 channel has the most recent movies. We showed Barbie when it was in the cinema in the US, right? There's all your box office movies end up on Mnet, sometimes faster than your pay window. So you know that there's a life cycle of a movie in the industry. It goes to the cinema, it goes before it comes, there's a cycle it has to go before it comes to TV. That's global, right? But then because of the way the streaming platforms have somewhat revolutionized the space, the window has been cut short. So you'd find that a lot of series now that are express from the US, we call them express from the US because we're showing them the exact same time that they are showing them in the US. Same with movies. If you check the Mnet 101 channel, that is the channel for premieres of the newest movies. The rest of the channels, depending on the deals with the studios, your movies can be within 2 years, less than 2 years, or within 2 to 5 years. You see the movies, the channels that you see movies that are old, they are deliberate. The fact that they are new movies doesn't mean that we discard old movies. Right. The fact that movies, these are the new movies within the last 2 years, we don't discard movies from 15 years ago or 10 years ago. There are people who those movies are new to. And that's where segmentation and target audience also then comes into play. Because we have watched those movies over time, and to us, they are now old. There's some people that are new to TV. I hope you do know that every year there are communities and there are people who have just even been attached to the national grid. There are people who were not part of a TV household and now have just joined a part of a TV household. And then there are people who have been a part of a TV household, who have been watching your analog, but have then just joined your pay TV households. So it's a funnel. And that's why you'd have different channels that then target different people. If you hate watching old movies, please go to Mnet 101, your MM1 movies. Please go there. You will find the latest movies. I mean movies from this year. movies from last year. You'll find them there. Your Studio Universal, your other movie room, those are curations of older movies for target audiences that they are new to, and for target audiences that really just enjoy watching things again. There's a huge culture of repeat watching, what they call repeat watching in data, where people find solace in watching something that is familiar to them. They will go find and discover new content, but you see, at night, they want to go back to an old movie that they watched 5 times. It's also a phenomenon with kids. The repeat watch for kids content is it's ridiculous. You would find one title that one household has watched 50 times in 1 week, and you're wondering, are you guys watching something else? But you see, these kids don't mind. They want to watch it over and over and over and over again. There's a segment that also applies to. So that's why we would have over 200 channels where you would find something that works for you. So please change your remote, pick up your remote, change the channel. The Mnet movies, the Mnet 101 to be precise, carries all your fresh series, mostly expressed from the US, and your new movies. The others are somewhat windowed. I'll also, this is now just by way of information. You know that there are some channels that your premium customer sees all channels. Your compact customer doesn't see all the channels, but there are some channels for the compact customer where we've windowed the content to. So if a premium customer is watching the Mnet movies 4 channel, you're wondering, I just watched it on Mnet, on the Mnet movies 1. Why am I watching it again? It's not for you. It's for the guys who don't have Mnet 1. That channel is put there for them, right? So again, I think this meeting has been a data point for me, because I'm hearing questions that is making me see that we need more information to the customers and more customer education in how to discover our content.
Great. This speaks a data analyst. Now, Soji is asking, how can producers with new content engage with your platform? But I believe you already said you will share a link for that.
And if everyone now, please follow African Magic channel, the African Magic page, on Instagram, on Twitter. What we also do there, this is for licensed shows now. You've already produced the content and you're wondering how to get it on the platform. We open the portal periodically. So at the moment, I know that African Magic, I think it was Epic or Yoruba, has just put up a post to say that that portal is open. Please submit all your content. And so please watch out for when those happen. Yes, watch out for when those happen. The different channels will put it up on the pages to say the window is open for licensed shows. So if you have any movies, any shows that you have already produced, you can then upload. But if it's a pitch, that will then go to the link that I'm going to share.
And Bade is asking, talking about MultiChoice Talent Factory, is there a reason why this is subjected to a particular age bracket? Because older people who didn't have such opportunities during their time would want to explore this too. Well, if you'll permit me to respond to that one, since I'm also involved in that, I would say that it really is because we have had the experience in admitting into the talent factory, people who, pardon my putting it in this way, but who are already formed in their way. And of course, it's particularly difficult to get things through because people come with already established way of doing things and they're not open to taking on new things. So the tendency is to go for younger people who are more amenable to receiving insight. Imagine bringing to class some of the top producers who are teaching. Somebody in the class says, what are you talking about? This is why I do it. This is where I will always do it. And of course, this is the top producer. You see that we have people like that to us. It's difficult, really. So that's why, to avoid kind of thing, people are more amenable to that. Now, attain a certain age and certain experience, then we have the master classes. Okay, the master classes with MultiChoice. also puts forward, so that everybody really has a space in which they can pick up something and grow. By the way, I am not marketing for the talent factory. I'm only expressing what I know of that detail. Okay, now let me ask a question here. Maybe it's not so much a question, but maybe it's just really to establish this. A lot is said today about the impact that funding from Netflix has had on the Nigerian film industry. But I think that there's a tendency to overlook the lifeline that MultiChoice was to the industry at a crucial moment in its development, because we know that MultiChoice was the first to begin acquiring Nigerian films in the 1990s when most people would not touch it. They didn't want to touch those films. And given the continent-wide reach of MultiChoice, it facilitated greater visibility for those films across Africa, creating a continental audience as well. And I think we can say that it has remained a platform for many people to exhibit their work. So, well, we've spoken now about the training, MultiChoice Talent Factory, but can you speak on how, through your role, you continue this support for the industry?
Yes, I will take it back to when Nollywood really started. So you can't talk about Nollywood without talking about MultiChoice, right? Because I think we were a vehicle for each other at the time. Nollywood was producing, MultiChoice was exporting the content and exporting the talent, exporting all of that, right? Even for and even for music. We have done this for 30 years. We're still investing in the industry. We will continue investing in the industry. It's something that we have taken as part of our lifestyle as a company, right? And yeah, it's also a means to an end. You grow the industry for the distribution, for the customer. So all of us, including the producers, including the industry, have the same goal. Our end game is our customer. And our customer can either watch on MultiChoice, they can watch on a streaming platform, they can watch at the cinema, they can choose whatever platform they want, right? But we're doing all of this because of the customer. So would we continue investing? Yes. The OTTs did come into the space and brought in heavy funding, which was very, very welcome. We've been doing this for years. We know how much it costs every year. We produce over 1,000 hours. If you take away our reality shows, if you take away a show like Big Brother that runs for 3 months, 24 hours, don't forget that people run that show. Actual humans sit behind those cameras, sit in the MCRs 24 hours a day for 3 months. I think that alone is usually underestimated. We see the final product and we're like, oh, the show didn't. The humans that run those shows are producers. They're part of the industry. They're writers, they're line producers, they're series producers, part of this same industry that we are talking about. That is a huge investment. If you look at the AMVCAs look like it's one night and though they produce it for 3 hours. No, it's 9 months of work. And it's 9 months of engaging filmmakers. It's filmmakers that judge the movies, by the way. It's 9 months. It's the judging phase where people dedicate their days, like days stuck in a particular location. They don't judge it online. They actually dedicate their time and sit there together with the audit firm, and they view this content for days without a break, right? So these are things that go beyond just monetary investments, right, to the industry. Yes, the streaming platforms did come with huge funding. It has opened up the industry. And I think that we need more competition in the industry. We welcome competition. So they've come to compete. If you look at the audience in the market, we still all have not scratched the surface, and that's the truth.
No.
All of us put together have still not scratched the surface, right? So they have put in the funding, but we continue to sustainably put in the funding. We are building a sustainable industry, a sustainable ecosystem. That's what we've done. That's what we'll always do. This is our own primary market. So this is home for us. Africa is home for us. And we will continue to invest there. We have, and I'll speak to even just one channel. In the one channel, we have over 48 titles that are produced every year. And this includes your series, your movies, your short form, long form. If you look at how that impacts the ecosystem, it's sustainable and it's very purposeful. So we're not saying we're giving 10 producers this fund and these 10 producers go produce for us and bring back the fund. We're sharing it. So you'd find people who would produce for African Magic Yoruba at a certain budget. You find people who produce for African Magic Igbo, Hausa. There is a bigger funnel, there's a bigger platform, and there's a bigger ecosystem that we address. And anyone else who comes into the space and does their bits, like I've mentioned this a few times, that is a shared problem, right? And it will be a shared solution. So every other player who comes into the space and does their own bits really does need to be appreciated for their own bits. Right. Forget about intentions, forget about agendas, have the lives of the people who have been impacted changed? Yes. Has the industry been better for it? Yes. Do viewers have more choice? Yes. But back to MultiChoice, yes, it's a space that we will continue to heavily invest in across different platforms.
Thank you. Now, I was asking whether there are plans to develop a dedicated platform or channel, just like Cartoon Network, showcasing locally produced children's content. But I believe you have already responded to that there's a need for continuity, for consistency, for a pipeline. Right. Yep. Then David is concerned about the DSTV subscription. He says, is it getting too expensive? How have audiences responded to online mobile subscription methods, such as Showmax, which aren't necessarily reliant on power in housing and are cheaper as regards media consumption?
It's a tricky question to answer, right? Because there are many ways to answer the question. Is it getting too expensive? It depends on who's asking and who is it depends on who's asking and depends on who's answering, right? So there are different packages that we believe that at some point people can afford. So if you can afford premium, there's compact plus, there's compact, there's family. What we are then doing is trying to make sure that we're making the content a bit more accessible. And as an example, at the beginning of May, African Magic Showcase moved down to compact from premium. That is our own way of saying, look, we hear you. The economy is what the economy is. We need to remain an operational business within the economy. However, we also understand that this has an impact on a viewer. So we would make certain content then available to the lower packs. So as an alternative to you saying, I can't afford this thing and I'm no longer paying for it, you can then say, I can't afford this pack and I'm going to move to a lower pack, which maybe was the same amount I was paying before, but then we've kind of brought down the content just a bit so that it's still accessible. Is Showmax doing well? Yes, it is. Is online mobile subscriptions doing well? It's an opening market. Data is still largely a problem, even though we know that the telcos have come in with cheaper data rates, and then we know that there is accessibility to data, but largely data is still expensive. And the 5% cannot say data is now cheap. We have to listen to the 90% or 95% that data is still expensive for. Lagos is not Nigeria. The urban community is not Nigeria. There's still the mass market. And now you have your upper, middle, and mass. There's really no middle per se any longer. That has really diminished. So you're finding now that people are either in upper or in mass, right? Because of the economics of the landscape. So that's why I said it was a tricky question to answer, because there are alternatives. But yes, to your question, the mobile subscriptions are growing. it's a growing alternative for people who don't want the DSTV subscription. And we have just reached a deal with one of the big telcos to bundle some of our services with their data. So I think this would even open up the market a bit more and make data and content consumption more accessible to people.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you. Then Otiga is asking, I know there are several factors affecting this, but can you share the average licensing / commissioning budget for films and TV shows?
No, Tiga, I cannot share. If you have a project, if you have a movie, please come engage with us. Because like you've mentioned, there are several factors affecting it.
Yes, yes, yes. Usaku is asking, is there a funding mechanism for documentary films by MultiChoice? Also, why isn't there a channel on DSTV dedicated solely to showcasing African documentaries?
If we had a channel for every genre, I think we'll run out of satellite capacity space. So we cannot have a channel for every emerging genre. What we can do is integrate them to our current platforms. Are we seeing an increase in documentaries and short films? Yes, we have been discussing that in the recent months to see how we can treat your documentaries and your short movies, because the shorts are also gaining a lot of traction, and it's also going with the consumption patterns of certain viewers. So yes, those are discussions we're having to see how, not a channel, again, where would this be in 5 years? If we are not directly investing in it, then we cannot 100% tell you that in 5 years, this will still be here. And I'm not saying it won't be, I'm just saying that it can take a different shape or form. So with opening channels, I think that there are several factors to consider, but sustainability is also a goal. A pipeline is also a very big goal. I've seen a lot of great documentary. I've also seen a lot of documentaries that aren't well shot. And we're in 2025, there are certain contents now that we shouldn't be airing anymore, that even we as channels are trying to move away from. But you see, in moving away from them, we're killing some producers. So you'd find some things on our channels that are still there that shouldn't be. But then what happened to those producers? As much as we're trying to upskill them and make them also even upskill the ways they produce, well, it will be a gradual process. We've been here training, we've been here accommodating. We'll continue to do that. We're not going to do a quick flip on the industry and then disregard a whole segment of the industry. So we are having those conversations to see how we can integrate some documentaries and some shorts in our programming.
Great. Then Anthony is saying, we see the likes of private companies releasing data on numbers of subscribers and how content is consumed. Since MultiChoice is huge on data, as you have said earlier, when can journalists get these data to further help spread these information to inform the masses on how content is consumed and how subscription rate affects users?
So you see those companies that, and I'm assuming you're journalists, you see those companies that are releasing data on number of subscribers. I mean, we're a listed company as well. So if you did a search, just a desktop research, you would find our annual reports there as well, being that we're publicly listed. So that data is there. I think that there should be a lot of data about the company and the year in view in those reports that you can access. But from a from a content data perspective, a lot of the data that we have really are either project skewed or strategy skewed. They are not there's a name for it. They're not the data that you then submit to the public, right, for consumption. But there are companies who do this, who would mind. I was at a conference by the OMD research group. the OMD company. They've partnered with a research company, and they have a lot of data on marketing, on branding, on different industries, on consumer trends. These data do exist. Some of them have a subscription, something small to pay for it, but there's a lot of them that are also free to access. I think you can do just a bit of research to see a more industry-wide data research for content and consumer patterns.
Okay, there's a long question from Tokwe Alake, but I think that one is more personal to you, so I'll leave you to read that. And maybe I think the concern is how to reach you to send across some proposal. So I will not read that one out. Okay, then Stephen is
asking, you can reach out to me, and then we'll have that conversation.
Stephen is, well, there's a comment. Just look into the possibility of a niche and hands-on training programs for trainers. Okay, that is noted. Let me ask you what perhaps will be my last question.
Okay.
Back to the point that today is International Women's Day. And the theme for this year is for all women and girls, rights, equality, empowerment. Now, it is very striking that some of the more prominent persons in the Nigerian film industry today are women. It may give the impression that, yes, it's easy to climb up the ladder and all of this kind of thing. But in terms of equality and empowerment, are there particular challenges that you would say women face
Can you repeat the last part of your question?
in our film industry? I know that you are doing, I would say, in terms of equality, empowerment, are there particular challenges that you would say women face in our industry? Okay. You are doing quite a bit in terms of mentoring other women through the MultiChoice Women's Forum, for instance. So how is it generally in terms of women climbing up the ladder in the film industry?
It is difficult. But has it evolved over the years? Yes, and that's why you're seeing women, just like you mentioned, in the spaces they are in. There are still some biases that still need to, and some biases and stereotypes that I believe still need to be addressed. But yes, there are still challenges that I know that women face. And I mean, I hear a lot of them during our mentoring sessions. I hear a lot of them personally when people come to me. I see a lot of them happen sometimes on sets, on production sets or within projects that even be commissioned. We do our best to address as many as possible, but we have gotten past the point where women are then put in projects as just a token. So you'd find that, yes, there are many women on the set, but if you check, they are the production accountants, they're production assistants, they're there, but they're not doing anything in the forefront. But that is really changing. You're seeing women a lot more women now that are executive producers, series directors, series producers, and are doing a lot more. Are there still areas and challenges that still need to be overcome? Absolutely. We only have just started, right, in that journey of equity, right? But I know that the year's theme this year is Accelerate Action. And we have talked, I was really looking forward to seeing what this year's theme would be, because now we've said diversified, we've said all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's time to actually start accelerating a lot of these things that we are talking about. And that means that every woman and every man, International Women's Day is really for the men, not for the women. And I don't know if you can still hear me because your video is frozen. But I believe that the International Women's Day is really for the men. It's really surfacing some of the issues that the women face and actually calling them out and seeing that the men also start taking a step towards it, right? Otherwise, women wouldn't be, yes, women wouldn't be talking about, yes, it's really just a reminder for the men to also accelerate action. But we women as ourselves also need to do the same.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much,
Thank
Busola.
you.
We just take a last question here from Tony, who is asking, as a point person for content and the data guru, does MultiChoice have a fan magazine? What space do you have for a critical space?
We do not have a fan magazine, and I would like to take you up on that and just hear your thoughts about it.
Okay, so Tony, that's a challenge to you to send it. You can send it through me. I know who. You can send it through me, Tony, and I will forward it. I will forward it to Busola. Busola, thank you so very much.
Thank you
This
for
has been a
having me.
very enlightening conversation, and it underlines what I said at the beginning. You are very busy. There's a lot on the table. Oh, sorry, the network is really messing me up today. Thank you so much for giving us this time in spite of your busy schedule. We really appreciate it, and on a Saturday, for that matter. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so
And I
much
hope
for
that we
having
will,
me.
yes, we hope to be able to invite you sometime or to see you on our campus.
I will be happy
to
to
see you
oblige.
there.
Yes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right.
And thank you very much to our audience. Thank you for your questions and so on. And do enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again,
Bye.
Busola.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.